Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Dave.
Oh, wow. So, well, thanks everybody for coming. And today we're going to continue to build on the rain gauge system and as it pertains to the combined source communities and their usage. So I think today we're going to start with Jake and kind of run by a little bit of the rain gauge review, and then Brad will follow in with the follow-up. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave. So we are going to, as Dave said, build on the 3WG presentation and even the separate sanitary presentation last week. Run through what precip tools we have available, how we get the data, where it's located, how to obtain it. How are we going to utilize that precip? Whether it's single event characterization, how it works with the flow data, getting it into the SOAP program to do storm deconstructions, and then from there moving into SWIM, looking at projects, doing alternatives analysis, and then look at the timeline a little bit and so talk about some specific combined sewer applications. Then we'll go through questions. So being that this is about the third time I'm running through this, I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. I figure if there are questions while I'm going through this, feel free to ask, and I can address them. But I'm thinking at the end of the meeting, I could potentially do live demos if there's questions, things like that. If you have anything specific, you could hold it to the end. So this is the pop-up screen once you get to the Three Rivers precipitation tool, the Three Rivers rainfall tool. Again, I'll say that the pop-up provides a lot of good information. You see there's overview methods, and that's the methods on how we actually get the data and adjust the rainfall, things like that. How to get the data, gives you demos, actual links to YouTube videos, and then looking under the hood, even if you wanted to, as far as how this was put together. Just in general, Three Rivers, with the support of Alcosan, maintains a network of 33 rain gauges across Allegheny County. This was originally set up in 2001. I think the sophistication of the network, they were one of the first to do something like this. It's pretty complex data pipeline involving a lot of partners, View and Associates, Alcosan, DataWise. There's a lot of involvement here to collect and then QA/QC and provide the rain data. It's a map-based tool, so this is what you're going to see once you get into the tool, with locations of pixels and rain gauges on the map on your left. On top, you have your different sources of the rainfall, whether it be real-time, historical rain gauge data, or calibrated radar rainfall. And then on the right is where you're selecting your time period and actually what pixels or rain gauges you want to download. We have 3 listed here, but there's really 4 different types of precipitation you can get. On the real-time end, there's 2. You can get real-time data from the rain gauges themselves, or from the pixels, which is radar-based. That's not QA/QC. That's the raw data. Basically anything within the last 30 days, you're pulling real-time rainfall data. Historical rain gauge data, that's the actual data collected at that rain gauge location, and it has been QA/QC'd. So I'd say that's generally available within 30 days. And then on the calibrated radar rainfall end, that is um, the radar system, the NextRad pixels, that uh, data is adjusted using actual QA/QC rain gauge data to provide, it's sometimes called on here GARR, gauge adjusted radar rainfall. And the lag to get that data is a little bit longer just because there's an extra step in there to make the adjustments. So we'd say 30 to 60 days. Here's the methodology on how that's all determined, and you know, the shortcomings of, hey, you can get rain gauge data, you're actually collecting it at that location, but that is only representative of that specific location. We get a lot of localized rainfall, and the uh, the amount that's falling a mile away is going to be much different in a lot of cases than what you're seeing right at that rain gauge. And when you combine that information with the radar system, which I have it highlighted in here, it's detecting the intensity of microwave energy reflected by raindrops. You're combining that information with the rain gauge data itself to get adjusted radar rainfall, and that takes those 33 rain gauges and basically turns them into 2,313 rain gauges placed across the county. So pretty impressive, and a very good resource for us. In the tool, when you're clicking on the calendar and you're selecting your time periods, that's what you're doing there on the right with that button, and down on the bottom you're clicking on, by sensor, by pixel. As I said before, real-time radar or real-time rainfall, you can select the pixel or the gauge itself. For the historical rain gauge information, that's just rain gauge based, and then calibrated radar rainfall is all pixel based. An additional function we have is, and I'm going to go to the next slide real quick. On the right there, next to the calendar icon, you see that list icon. That will get you pre-populated precipitation events. This is determined by View and Associates. It's 0.05 inches of precipitation, registering at least half of the rain gauges. So it's not going to be a comprehensive list, but it's a good start. And this list goes all the way back to 2000. And I hope to build upon this and add statistics to it, things like that, on Three Rivers End. We also now have the ability to select by geography in this tool. And really, I think you could click on by geography and start typing in, and it'll bring up basins, sewer sheds, RCSFMP sheds, I think, and municipalities. And once you click on that, it'll access that shapefile and basically select all the pixels within that area. It doesn't aggregate the information, but it will get you all those pixels. So once you have your selections made, you hit get rainfall data. Depending on how much you select, it might take some time in this box down at the bottom right. Then you can view and download your results. This is currently what it looks like when you download the preset from the tool. I highlighted here on the CSV below in that timestamp. You can see there's some work that needs done to actually split that up and make it usable for plotting, things like that. This is just some instruction on exactly how to do that. So the next tool we have in the top left, you see a box needs something more powerful. This is on the first pop-up that you get when you get to the Three Rivers Rainfall tool. And it gives you a link, shows you where to request access sending an email to Annie. And this just gives a little bit more functionality, different formats, things like that for you to use. It's a more powerful precip tool at this point. Also a map-based tool, you have a dashboard. It has all the pixels up there. It has different layers that you can use. You can bring in your own layers to this tool, which is also helpful. And based on those different layers, down at the bottom left of the map, you can see different scales. The first three there are the actual gauge adjusted radar rainfall, and there's three of them because we can show it based on pixels, based on sheds, and based on basins. So that's helpful in itself there. And then the fourth one that's shown is depth, duration, frequency, basically a return interval on a storm. This is what it would look like on a pixel basis for your GARR. Basically showing you how much precip fell over a specified amount of time. This is the view from the DDF grid. And you can see there, highlighted in the middle there in orange, that's a 100-year design storm, return interval for this storm. It was brought up last week when we were going through this that you can see a clear difference between the gauge adjusted radar rainfall, which is just giving you total precip, and this is for the same storm, versus what that looks like on a return interval basis. I think right now we're looking directly south of Pittsburgh is where it got hit the hardest, and you wouldn't necessarily know that from looking at from this view. That has to deal with the precip intensity, things like that. So that's a powerful tool for characterizing maybe a single event that just happened. We just got a bunch of rain yesterday. We could play around with that and see, how it fell throughout the county. For data downloads, going back to your dashboard, you click the data download icon, go in, you select what you would like to download, and select the time period, things like that. It's pretty simple. And this view here shows something I think it's very powerful for modelers, things like that, is you can select by pixel, by sewer shed, or by basin. And when you get your results in this scenario, it has all the data aggregated as if it represents that entire sewer shed. If you're looking to recalibrate, if you have updated flow data at an RCS FMP location, you want to get the precipitation associated with that monitor. Those sheds are already built into this tool, and you can select just that meter shed, and it will give you a result there. It's nice to be able to see the data on, from these different perspectives, whether it's pixel, sewer shed, basin, actual just rain gauge itself. They're going to give you different results, and this graph kind of shows some of those differences. Just selecting date, time. This is what it looks like when you actually download using that tool. It has a history of everything downloaded. You can go back in and download it.
That graph slide. Multi-municipal, everybody has to be using the same data, right?
Yeah, that is something we talked about last week. It was important. Yeah. Yes, you want to be talking with your neighbor, whatever model calibration updates you're making, things like that. You want to be using the same precipitation data.
And pick one of those four.
I think it depends on the application. If I'm looking at a single sewer shed, I'm looking at a small sewer shed tributary to an SSO. My first instinct would be to go and download the precip that represents that RCS FMP sewer shed. I think that would be most representative of what we're seeing. But I think I would also download the rain gauge data if there's one right there. And if I saw some discrepancies, hey, this precip is not matching up with this flow monitoring data, I would look at my other resources to see, is there something more representative? Or if there's many sheds, then many different.
Maybe just add a little bit. I totally agree. I think typically you want to look at the radar rainfall. It's typically looking at your whole watershed. So instead of having data at a point, it's looking at a bigger area for that. But if you do get those really variable rainfalls, you know, that it has one rain gauge at one end of that pixel is reading 2 inches, and the rain gauge at the other end of that pixel is reading 0.2 inches. Yeah, you have to use some engineering judgment to look at what was your response in your system, look at all those different sources of rainfall and kind of determine what's the most appropriate one to use. Because while the calibrate radar is a great tool and a great enhancement over just point rainfall data, obviously it's still an analysis, it's still an estimation based on the radar rainfall or radar information and the calibration to those points. So that is something that there is still some engineering judgment that's in there.
Okay.
But that's why you really have to communicate across.
Especially if you're doing the analysis on the same watershed, yes, you want to be doing that in a consistent manner so that you're not going back to DEP and saying one thing and your neighbor from the same area is saying something different. That's just going to add confusion and create more work for yourself as you're trying to explain that to the DEP.
And this is the last slide really I have as far as going over these tools is the RainView VIP tool gives you a lot of different options. I'm not even showing them all here of different formats you could download the precip in. You know, direct input files to swim, InfoWorks, things like that is helpful and saves time. Brad, you want to take over on this?
No questions online yet, so.
What we got next to me?
Now we're going into different applications, data QA, QC, things like that. I keep running through
Yeah,
it.
you can keep running, please.
So just we already kind of went through a single event characterization. That's one way to utilize this precip. You know, you're also using it for your data QA, QC as kind of we had already talked about. If you know, precip's not matching up the flow data, maybe there's different precipitation data available, or, you know, maybe there was an issue with the flow data at that time. Another thing you're going to be doing with this precipitation data is putting it into SOAP. We need to, if you have flow data, you have precip data associated with it, most likely you're going to be deconstructing that data. And EPA SOAP is the tool you're going to use. This is just examples of loading that data in. Really just provided for benefit. People could go back and look at this presentation if need be, or contact me with any questions. SOAP provides guidance documents on getting all this done as well. And I'm sure there's YouTube videos too. So you'll get the data in, you'll use it to, you know, for your dry weather flow analysis, you'll use it for actually deconstructing storms. It will come in handy when you're doing the RTK analysis. And this is really the first step towards, you know, recalibration or validation. After that, loading it into SWIM. As we said, there's already direct inputs from RainView you could use. Or, you know, just insert it in as a time series file, link it to your rain gauge. And now we're on combined sewer uses.
Thanks, Jake. I think we're really blessed in this region you know, for the amount of rainfall data that we do have that's collected here for these type of analyses, both from a rainfall data or rain gauge network that's permanent, well-maintained, than having this type of radar rainfall data available at your fingertips. That's not typical in a lot of regions. So we're very blessed to have that here, and it's very beneficial for these type of analyses. As Jake said, there's a lot of different uses for the rainfall data. He stepped through some of those going through the deconstruction. For the combined system, this is going to be a little bit different. I still picture going through the deconstruction and identifying your base wastewater, your groundwater infiltration, you know, those components away from the wet weather response. But within the model, obviously, we have a slightly different hydraulic representation in the model. So may not have the RTK, maybe more of the surface hydrology parameters that we'll tweak. But sometimes we do use some of the RTK to kind of give that long duration tail that we quite often observe in some of the combined systems. But some of the other uses are just your standard CSO reporting. Everyone should be monitoring or somehow identifying when you are having discharges from your CSOs. With that, you want to characterize those. You want to know what is the rainfall that, you know, triggered those overflows. The system is great for giving that information to be able to put into your reporting back to the agencies. Many of you have already completed baseline due diligence. Some of you may still be working on that, but you know, as part of that, if you've done projects within your system that you wanted to account for, and you've collected post-construction monitoring data for those projects, you're going in and looking to recalibrate the model to see what benefits that brought towards a percent capture. This rainfall can be used again for that recalibration purposes. Obviously, as we get towards the end of this program, you're going to be implementing your projects. You need to do a post-construction monitoring. This is the data you can use to go along with the flow monitoring data that ultimately can be used for that, again, recalibration for the post-performance validation of your projects. Wanted to highlight some of the activities that are coming up here in 2023. There's a lot of things, like I mentioned, baseline due diligence. A lot of you probably have already completed those. The unique thing with the CSO orders, they're all based on the time of your execution. So there's not an exact same timeline for each and every CSO community. So those are kind of on a rolling dates based on your execution. Baseline due diligence was 6 months. We have the proportionate share determination that you should be doing for your multi-municipal areas. You had the 15 months for that, and then 18 months for your development of list of projects, your implementation schedule, things along those lines. So those are all early activities and mid activities here in 2023 that everyone should be working on. As I mentioned, baseline due diligence. I wanted to point out for the proportionate share determinations, if you're not having those conversations with your neighboring communities, you need to be having those now. Please note that within the order, there is a default value. If you can't reach consensus with your neighbors, it becomes the combined area percentage acreages that are on your Exhibit A's. So if you don't agree with those, that means you need to get with your neighbor, work through that, and come up with the appropriate proportionate share within those multi-municipal areas. You know, and remember, that doesn't have to be based on acreages. There's lots of different ways to do that proportionate share. The order leaves it open for you to negotiate that with your neighbors. So that could be based on area. It could be based on population. It could be based on inch miles. It could be based on flows if there's flow monitoring data. Any technical reason that all of you could, you know, reach across the table and say, this is appropriate, shake your hand on it and say, this is what we're moving forward with, is available to you. But if you don't make that agreement with them, it falls back on those acreages on your Exhibit A. Also, your economic feasibility analysis. You're going to have to develop that list of projects. So if those become where you feel those are not economically feasible for your community, you need to develop that feasibility, financial feasibility analysis to document why you can't afford that. And again, that typically that does not provide exemption from doing work. It's going to give you a longer time frame to implement those, is typically how those are seen by the regulatory agencies. The list of projects, as we mentioned, is here in mid-2023. With that, you need to do your alternative analysis to how to get your 10% improvement project on your percent captures, or to get the 85% if that's less than that 10%. So you need that alternative analysis. You need to show what that expected percent capture increase is. So it's not just saying, here's my list of projects. You got to say that project based on some type of analysis is going to get me 10% or 11% or 15%. You need to do the analysis to show that your anticipated performance is that. The cost, you need to include the cost for that full construction of those projects as part of your list of projects. So you need to develop what those costs are, and then see what that impact is on your monthly sewer user rates. So there's quite a bit of work to be done in there based on that list of projects. In addition, you need to provide your implementation schedule for that list of projects that you're submitting to meet those obligations for the percent capture improvements. Yes. The way the order reads right now, yes. So that let me repeat the question for those online. Question was, if I'm a community, I have 5 different POCs, 5 different CSOs that are all underneath the 85% capture. So I need to do a 10% project. Or the question is, do I need to do a 10% project in each one of those areas? I think the direct reading of the order, I would say, yes, you need to do a 10% project in each one of those areas. Actually, at our last meeting, Tony brought up the question of, in that scenario, could I identify what's the total flow reduction for those 5 areas? And would it be acceptable to the agencies that if I achieve that full flow reduction, but could I do that in 1 area or 2 areas? If that's more cost effective for me to do, would that be acceptable? That's a question we're going to take to the agencies and try to get some feedback from them. You know, so that, I think more to come on that as we get a response from the agencies, but the clear reading of the orders to me is, a more conservative reading would be, yes, you need to do it at each and every area.
The only thing I would add just is that combined sewer communities, by definition, have a lot more flexibility in how you approach that order itself. You actually have a better place to stand to do evaluation, especially if you start looking at the economic feasibility analysis side of it. So there are different ways you can actually frame your argument. The only thing is, your argument can't be, I don't want to do anything, or I wouldn't do the bare minimum. If that's your argument, that's not appropriate level. But you're better positioned to actually attack your problem systematically.
And I think that's a great example with the financial analysis. Those are a couple different ways you could utilize that. You know, if you're saying, you know, I have financial limitations to avoid the heavy burden on the community. You know, so in that example that there's 5, maybe your alternative is, I'm going to work on 3. You know, instead of all 5, I can't afford the other 2 right now. I'll do those next. But right now we'll attack the 3. Or here's the ones that are most sensitive to the environment or to public contact. So we're going to prioritize those areas and make the improvements there. So it does give you some flexibility to have those conversations. I think those are all probably one-on-one conversations that need to be held or on an individual watershed. But like, as I mentioned, we are looking to take that Tony's example of, could I aggregate what those flow reductions are and apply those to a subset of my area, and seeing if that might be acceptable to the agencies.
So I'm not maybe then directly to
I think probably, one, you can use us, the Three Rivers, as a clearinghouse to help answer some of those. And it, you know, we can see, like in Tony's question, it was a specific question, but it could be applied to many, right? So I think that gives us the ability to do that. I think ultimately, a lot of times what we'll get is we can get an initial response from DEP, but when we need to talk through those specifics, I think ultimately that probably would be a letter or a meeting directly with the municipality, with the agencies. And I, you know, don't want to speak for you, Dave, but I'm sure we'd be more than happy to assist you in that
process as well.
Buy them and I come back and say, well, we'll deal with them on a individual basis. Here's what they need to submit to us to go through it. You know, while it sounds logical, sometimes we have to be persuasive in our application of logic. And so we'll, I think we're the good caveat to do it, because it's not just one community who has this potential prospect of doing this way.
The other way to frame that question in terms of having individual dialogues associated with the list of projects, keep in mind that each combined sewer municipality has its individual order with the department. And it has an obligation to develop that list of projects identified in the order. Some might be multi-municipal projects, Brad has mentioned there. Some might be singular municipal projects, and some might be sensitive areas. That individual municipality needs to chart its own course in terms of its priorities. So at the end of the day, that is a list of projects, priorities with the economic feasibility analysis list of projects, and the thinking and thought process that goes into that source flow reduction effort. So that's an individual submittal that each individual municipality has. And Brad's going to talk about later about the ad hoc subcommittee meeting or subcommittee that's under development that's going to outline key elements associated with that list of projects submittal that each individual municipality has. So I think it's two different arguments. The discussion of from a global order interpretation, that's best through Three Rivers. Facilitation of multi-municipal source reduction projects and combined sewer systems facilitate through Three Rivers. Taking the ad hoc subcommittee developed outline and populating your individual listing of projects based on your specific metrics, that's going to be a municipal specific deliverable. So just wanted to set that precedent. There's different ways to attack that, but at the end of the day, each municipality has an individual deliverable.
That's a good way of putting it. I mean, what Three Rivers is trying to do is try to set the overall approach and to negotiate that with the regulatory agencies. But obviously then when it comes to application, that's a municipal responsibility. The feasibility or the economic feasibility analysis. We're going to have an ad hoc committee that's going to help set how to go through that process, but obviously doing it for each municipality is going to be that municipality's responsibility. And looking at how do you then take your list of projects and use that argument for your community. So those all be individual discussions, but I think kind of setting the stage and the groundwork to make those discussions that you're going to have on an individual basis easier. It's a lot easier if you have the region and the whole group kind of pushing forward towards that general approach than doing it on an individual basis. But obviously you'll have to make the merit on your own once we get to that individual basis.
And the other part of that in terms of what Three Rivers can provide pertaining to item number 2, if there is a multi-municipal project that you want to consider implementing with your neighbor, Three Rivers can support developing that pro rata share if you're not comfortable with the default value that's in the order. So in terms of identifying responsibilities, in terms of implementation, pro rata cost share, things like that, that's a significant resource that Three Rivers can provide as you develop your list of projects.
And that kind of leads into a online comment that we have. It states the inter-municipality and intra-municipality credit exchange could also be discussed with the agencies. And I kind of see that already as the multi-municipal partnership text in the order that specifically says you can give money to someone else and that project does not need to be within your municipality. But if you have credit exchange comments, that's something.
Yeah, I think from a pure CSO perspective, I think people need to realize these projects aren't on necessarily a municipality basis. So, your metric is at the overflow. It's not at a municipal meter boundary, meter, it's at the CSO. So if I have 3 communities that are going to one CSO and that CSO is at 60% capture, a 10% project needs to be done. It doesn't say it needs to be done in each, a small piece needs to be done in each of the 3 communities. It says you need to make a 10% improvement project. And you need to do this proportionate share to work out how's that going to be done. It could be done as one project in one community and you say, I'm going to pay, X, someone's going to pay Y and someone's going to pay Z. Or that's proportionate share could say, hey, I'm responsible for 3% of it. I'm responsible for 5 and I'm responsible for 2. And you all do your individual projects in your own communities to achieve that pro rata share of the responsibility. So that pro rata share doesn't have to be a cost sharing where I'm passing money to another community. It could be just defining the responsibilities of achieving that 10% improvement between those municipalities. So that one is doing, whether it's 80%, the other is doing 20, whatever that break point is based on your agreement of that proportionate share.
But they're not working together. Don't know what somebody else is doing. You gotta make sure that barometer moves 10% on your own. Because you don't know what the neighbors are doing, so you can't say, well, I just thought on my own, I'm only X percentage of this area, so I'm only doing a 3% project. The order says move at 10%.
But if I'm only at 5%, but I community, one of the communities, all time in this, I'm at 5%, it makes sense.
You're correct. There are some right. If you're less than that 5%, yes, you're exempt from having to do anything. We're really talking about those people that have a responsibility as part of the order that has to participate in the flow reduction projects. And it's a multi-municipal area. You need to get together, whether you're planning on doing a joint project or whether you're doing independent projects. You still need to allocate the responsibilities of how much of that 10% project's being done by who. Even if you're doing separate projects, or it could be a cost sharing. If you could find a more cost effective one project that can get everything, it may be more effective to do that. So this allows you to do either one of those. And again, as Jason said, many times I'm sure it could be, hey, there's 3 communities, 2 want to work together. The third one doesn't quite want to get with us and talk about anything. That's where call Dave, call Annie. We're holding a lot of multi-municipal coordination meetings. We can help be that facilitator to try to bring people to the table and have a conversation. It still takes the communities to have the conversation and to participate. But I think Three Rivers has been very effective in bringing the people into the room, which is quite often the hardest part of that conversation is just getting it started. I wanted to kind of go through one tool that we have, the CAP tool, to kind of help you in developing that list of projects. It's really an alternative evaluation tool that we set up to try to estimate how much impervious area do I need to control to get that 10% improvement or whatever percent I need to achieve. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that again, that is available out on the MDS site. I think it's a pretty good tool. It could be used not only to come up with your estimate, but then to validate those results based on modeling as well. We'll step through that real quickly. So it's a spreadsheet tool. The stuff that's highlighted there in red, that comes from your Exhibit A. So a lot of the times that's just your baseline information. It may also come from your baseline due diligence if you've updated some of that information. So that's giving that information of, is it a multi-municipal and what are the acreage percentages? Or that could be updated if you have had that proportionate share discussion and reached a different assessment than those acreages. But it's putting that baseline information together. What is your percent capture that you have in there? The next piece is really putting in your baseline conditions. This is putting in those baseline flows. So it's, what is the influence, what weather flow that at the beginning of the program that I need to manage? What was that baseline overflow statistics, baseline upstream overflows and flooding volumes? That information all comes from our document A that had the existing conditions percent capture update TM. All that information is available within that document to pull into the spreadsheet. Next is looking at estimating how much impervious area do I need to manage. So now from that other information, I know I got to do a 10% project. I'm the only community, so I need to do a full 10% project. So I can put in that my target percent capture increase is 10%. It then calculates what that target overflow removal is to achieve that 10%. And then it does an equivalent impervious area calculation, assuming a typical year rainfall amount. And there is a user-defined overflow reduction efficiency number that you can put in. Because we all know that just because I remove 1 gallon of flow from the collection system doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to remove a gallon of overflow. So those are all site-specific type numbers. But that's a user-defined field that you can put in there. You could do some sensitivity model runs to start with if you wanted to come up with that. Or start with a value and then go to the model next and validate it. Let's say I'm 2 communities in that area. I have to do a 10% project. I'm 70% of the area or 70% of the proportionate share. I need to do a 7% project. So I can put that into this green column here and put 7% in. It'll calculate my target overflow reduction and calculate the percent acreage that I need to manage.
Target cost reduction. Then you go in your model and you set the project. Factors and such model and it's still too low. You need to really adjust the model. Higher percentage reduction.
Yeah, basically what that probably means, I go that user defined percent capture or that overflow reduction efficiency is too high. So I probably need to come back, reduce that. You can do it 2 ways. You can go back to that and reduce it, or like you said, I could need to go in the model. I need to capture more acreage, right? So now I need to bump that up so I capture that 10%. I think it depends on the watershed. Probably once you're in the model, it might be easy enough just to keep going in the model. I know I got 8% and I was hoping for 10. I need to probably get another 20% area, and go through it that way. That'd probably be the way I would do it, but I think you could do it either way.
This would be more applicable to source and control projects like sewer separation or green infrastructure.
Correct. Yeah, this is basically looking at trying to manage an amount of impervious area. The nice thing about combined areas that we have from our partners that are on the separate sanitary side of the systems, the majority of our flow is at least known where it's coming in. So it's a little easier to identify what the source is, how to manage it, things along those lines. Again, on the separate sanitary side of it, it's a leaky sewer. And so if I line that, we've had that discussion in those meetings, is how do I know what percent improvement I'm going to get out of that? It's very highly variable. Do I just push it to another spot where it's coming in? If I'm going to the street and I'm taking catch basins out, putting it to a storm sewer and putting it to a receiving water, I know I'm getting it out. So it is a little more structured than our partners over on the separate sanitary side of the system have to deal with. So our challenge is you don't always, it's not a 1-to-1 of remove flow to an overflow reduction. So that's the one challenge we have in here, but I think it's kind of a little bit of an iterative process that you can go through the modeling to evaluate that. So once I've identified, I have 3 acres that I need to manage. Now, what you need to do is you need to go to your sewer shed and say, where do I have 3 acres that I think I can most cost effectively pull out of the system? Whether that's a partial separation project, whether that's some type of green infrastructure to manage those flows, identify where those are from a real life standpoint. You could then incorporate that into the swim model. Once I've identified that, now I can go in and change the hydrology to say, hey, I just pulled out these 3 acres from these areas. Take those out, pull those out of the model, run the model, let's see what our results are. If I achieve my goal, I'm good. If I didn't, like you're saying, Glenn, I think you need to go back and you say, okay, I didn't quite get there. Now I got to identify a little bit bigger area than I thought I had to before to get that 10% project. So you'd run that in the SWIM model for the typical year simulation, because that percent capture is calculated over the full typical year. You would then extract your overflow statistics out of that model. You can then put those back into the cap tool and it'll recalculate your percent capture for you. So that's kind of how you kind of tie it all together from your baseline information, my target reduction, target impervious area that I need to control, validate it with the model, bring it back into this tool to do the percent capture calculation for you.
In Captain Obvious here, throwing something out, these statistics, this iteration, running through the model, developing a project, this is good information for an Alcosan Grow letter of interest. If you can document an increase in percent capture, moving impervious area away from the Alcosan sewer system, that makes great substance in terms of submitting an Alcosan Grow letter of interest. Captain Obvious there.
Thanks for the plug, Jason. Hey, Brad, can you go back a few slides?
Or
Yeah, keep going. Keep going. Pat, number 3, economic feasibility analysis. If somehow your municipality decides that they want to make the case of an economic feasibility analysis, it may be a good idea that you show that you at least tried to get growth.
yeah, I think that's a very good point.
If you put out a letter of interest, I think that your municipality is going to have a pretty hard time making the case that you cannot fill this job if you didn't try to find money that's been set aside for the municipality.
So Tim's comments for those online, if you didn't hear him, was basically if a municipality is looking to make that economic feasibility argument for their community, it would be very wise for them to make sure that they have gone for attempted to obtain grow funding for those projects. And I will say, if you go look at the guidance for the financial feasibility analysis, it does say that one of the things that communities need to demonstrate is they've gone after all available funding for those projects. So that reinforces what Tim just said, is that is actually almost a requirement of that financial feasibility analysis, is that you've demonstrated you've gone after all the available funding out there. And obviously in this region, we have the GROW program right there. That's probably your number one source, but we'll also look for other funding. We had that great workshop a couple of months ago with a whole number of funding agencies. You should be looking for all of those to see try to bring that in. I think the other thing to keep in mind with that economic feasibility analysis is you still need to do that full list of projects. What you need to show is, here's my full thing that I need to do to meet the obligations of the order. That come up with that cost, and then you need to show that cost is a financial burden. You can't just say, hey, I'm only going to do this because, we're financially strapped. So you need to come out that full list of projects. Like I said, it usually doesn't take away from what you have to do. It typically changes your duration that you have to implement these projects. Now, in this example, we're in a kind of an interim order, so it may change what your obligations are under this specific order, but keep in mind, if you don't get it done in this order, you're probably getting another order and you're going to have to deal with it then. So it's still something you kind of have to keep planning for. So having that full list of projects is a valuable planning resource for the community.
And you're not gonna just be able to say, we have 5 projects, we can't afford it. You gotta now dwindle it down to, well, this is the only thing this is what we can afford, and this is what it'll do. And Tim, that is a great suggestion. Because you're saying, hey, look, I actually looked for additional funding. And I'm out there trying to stretch these dollars to do whatever. And not only Tim's great program, but there's other programs that we brought to your attention that you should be applying for too. But Tim's a nice, easy one. He's dark red.
Sam, do you have
He's
something?
accessible.
Yeah, a question, does anyone know? Is any of the infrastructure bill, 2022 infrastructure act? Is any of that money available for these kind of projects? Because there was substantial amount set aside for water, wastewater and stormwater projects. So sometimes that money can come to municipalities as a, what they call pass-through funds from EPA to DEP, and then from DEP to municipalities. But in the past, DEP took a position that if you are required to do these projects under a consent decree or under a consent order, then you cannot get those grants because you are required. So, you know, there are many questions into this one question, you know. Maybe, and whenever we start talking about this, we end up talking to Penn West guys. But that is a loan. I mean, that is not a grant. You know, so it's a very low interest loan, like around 2%, but it is still interest that this municipality has to pay. I'm talking about grants. I'm talking about free money. So perhaps we can bring some expert to, you know, to tell us, like, where is that money and how can municipalities tap into it, or whether they can tap into it at all. Because we are in their sunset.
I mean, my experience, I guess, let me, kind of the question was related to funding and available funding through the infrastructure bills that have been passed at the federal level. And are municipalities available for any of that funding, and what's the best way to obtain that? You know, obviously, there's a lot of different funding agencies that we brought in here a couple of months ago. Many of them have received some of that infrastructure funding that's been passed down through them. Like Sam said, Penvest is one of those. I will say Penvest has both grants and loans. So they do have both sides of the program. And if you could show that you have that financial, through your financial analysis, that you're under that heavy burden, that does help you towards the grant side versus the loan side. Also, I have found, at least through them, is if you do have a consent order, it typically ranks you higher to get funding from them. So you're definitely available to get funding from them. And I think the other people that were in here as well, I think, are in similar arrangements where I don't think the consent decree would keep you from being able to get funding. I think it actually would help you towards getting funding with those agencies. I also think it doesn't hurt for you to talk to your representatives, because many times some of that funding can work through them as well, and they have certain, you know, buckets to work from. So you need to work through those angles as well as your traditional funding agencies to see what options are available for you. And I think it depends on the types of projects. Like we taught, you know, I think when some of the agencies were in here, they had some different things for stream removals. There was other things for lateral programs, or all kinds of different funding for different types of projects. And it's important to get your fingers out and talk to those agencies regarding your possible projects.
I think it's up to municipalities to talk to their representatives. Otherwise, you know, they do get those buckets of money to spend in their communities. If we do not approach them with water and wastewater needs, they're going to give that money on bridge and roading. So I think it's, you know, you will have to compete to get that money from them, and sooner the better.
As we said, we are establishing a number of ad hoc committees. As we've talked through today, you can see kind of the need for those and kind of the importance of some of those committees. The ones in red are really the ones that pertain to our combined system. Some of these are impact everybody. But the financial simulator subcommittee, we just talked through that financial analysis is kind of working through that. Where are the sources of data? There's a lot of inputs that go into that. It's kind of trying to standardize that. Where can we get it? Where can we effectively pull that information together to help facilitate those evaluations?
Watch for emails. I've signed up for the committee because first week of March, we'll be sending out, here's tentative dates. What can you make? You've offered to be on this committee. So we'll be sending that out that week.
Yep. We have the model revisions template and guidance document. So that's going to impact both combined and separate, but really that committee's focus in on, as we're developing these models, as we're making revisions, we want to make sure we can document those changes, provide those back to Alcosan so they understand what changes were made based on what, so that they can evaluate whether that should be incorporated into the overall system models. We have a number of tools that are being used, both to facilitate the alternative evaluations. So that's what that committee is. And then finally, that list of projects outline committee. So what does that report look like? How do we put the different sections for the different needs as you're putting that list of projects together? And as Dave said, keep your eyes open. If you did volunteer, we'll be setting those up here in early March. That's what I have for today, unless there's any questions.
Tim, just while we have it on, what is the date for the letters?
Letters are due Friday, they have to be postmarked Friday, March 31st.
Okay, Tim just said for his grow grant, your letter of interest has to be postmarked March 31st.
If you did not get a if your community did not get a bypass and they're free, that means that you have to, if you want a project, you have to put it in.
Everybody but, okay, what was that again?
Three projects got bypassed. So 3 projects were notified. You're good. We'll send you the application. So there are only 3 this site. Everybody else, if you want to put a project forward, I need a letter of interest.
Okay, so Tim said 3 projects got a letter that said you're good. The rest of you have to have a letter of intent in by that March 31st date if you want to be considered for a project. Being a recipient of them in the past, I can't say enough about the information. And everybody might have thought I was being facetious before, but Tim is readily accessible. If you have any questions, he's always been willing to help and will continue to willing to help. So help you through the process, and you can bounce some ideas around him. So that's good. So if nothing else, we'll see everybody on March 9th for a 3WG meeting. Thank you.